The deed was supposed to mark a new beginning, but nothing in the papers had prepared him for this. 4 towering women stood in the pasture as if the land itself had summoned them, their shadows stretching long against the late afternoon Sunday. They weren't just tall, they were colossal, their presence overwhelming, their gazes unblinking. And when they spoke, their voices carried the weight of promises he wasn't sure he wanted to hear. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. And if stories like this keep you hooked, make sure you hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's episode is even more unbelievable than this one. The deed crinkled in his fist as he stepped down from the saddle, dust settling around his boots. He'd imagined this moment for months, the day he'd finally arrive at land that was his, a place he could carve out a future without anyone to answer to. The horizon stretched endless and wild, a sea of grass rolling beneath the Sunday, no fences, no neighbors, no one to tell him how to live, just him and the earth. Or so he thought. They appeared first as silhouettes, distant against the brightness of the sky, until the light shifted and he realized they weren't just figures, they were women. 4 of them. Their long dresses clung to bodies built like mountains, shoulders broad, arms corded with strength, legs planted like oak roots. Even from across the pasture, they seemed impossibly tall, larger than life, in a way that unsettled him. He stopped walking, his heartbeat stumbling. Something about their stance, side by side, hands on hips, told him they had been waiting. The tallest stepped forward, her deep red gown catching the wind. Her face was carved in sharp lines, beautiful but unyielding, her eyes fixed on him with a calm intensity. "You must be the new owner," she said, her voice carrying across the open air like a bell. The other 3 flanked her, one in gold, one in teal, one in pale lavender, all watching him as though he had been summoned, not arrived of his own will. He lifted the deed slightly, as if the paper itself could shield him. "That's right," he said, trying to steady his voice. "This land's mine now. Bought it fair and square." The woman in teal smirked, crossing her arms across her chest. "Fair and square," she echoed, like the phrase was a child's game she didn't believe in. The one in gold tilted her head, studying him like he was livestock she wasn't quite sure would survive the winter. Something in the silence pressed on him heavier than the Sunday he had ridden 3 days through barren hills to reach this land. He'd pictured solitude, maybe even peace. But now, standing in the shadow of these women, he felt anything but free. He felt caught like a rabbit in a snare he hadn't seen until it was too late. The lavender-dressed woman stepped closer, her gaze steady. "We've been expecting you." Her words carried a certainty that chilled him. He hadn't told anyone about this land. The sale had been private, the transaction discreet. Yet here they were, standing on his soil as if it was theirs. The tallest one's smile sharpened as she closed the distance between them. "You'll find," she said softly, "that deeds don't mean much out here." The grass swayed in the wind, the only sound between them as his hand brushed instinctively toward the rifle strapped to his horse. For the first time since setting eyes on the farmhouse, the thought crossed his mind that he hadn't bought freedom. He'd bought trouble. And whatever these women wanted, it wasn't going to be as simple as asking him to leave. The air thickened between them, heavy with a silence that made his throat dry. 4 pairs of eyes bore into him, each woman's stance unflinching, their confidence radiating like heat off the plains. He had expected a battle against the land itself, drought, storms, lean soil, but not this. These women weren't intruders. They stood like guardians, as if the property had always belonged to them and he was the trespasser. The one in red, clearly their leader, took another step forward, her boots sinking into the earth with authority. "You've traveled far," she said, her tone measured. "And you've come thinking this place is yours. But we need to be clear about something. You're standing on ground that carries more than just dirt and grass. It carries promises." His brow furrowed. "Promises?" The word tasted wrong in his mouth. He glanced around the land, its empty fields stretching in every direction. What could they mean? The woman in gold let out a laugh, low and bitter. "The man before you thought the same. Believed he could walk in with paper and ink and claim what wasn't his to take." Her eyes locked on him, piercing and sharp. "He left more behind than debts. He left obligations." The teal-dressed woman crossed her arms, her voice deeper than the others. "And those obligations don't vanish just because he sold the land to you. They pass on, to the next owner, to you." His grip on the deed tightened, the edges biting into his palm. "That's not how the law works," he said, though his voice betrayed the unease crawling up his spine. "Contracts don't transfer like livestock or tools. This is my property now. Whatever arrangements he made don't concern me." The lavender woman tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "You think the law matters here? How many days' ride are you from the nearest sheriff? How many men could you call for help if things went wrong?" He opened his mouth, but no words came. She was right out here. There was no law but the kind people made themselves. And standing in front of these women, he felt just how far civilization had slipped away. The leader smiled faintly, though it didn't soften her gaze. "We're not here to frighten you. Not exactly. But we are here to make sure you understand. You've walked into a living arrangement, one that was set long before you arrived. And if you mean to stay, you'll honor it." He swallowed hard, his throat tight. "And if I don't?" The gold-dressed woman's eyes gleamed, her smile sharp as a blade. "Then you'll find out how quickly a man can disappear out here without anyone asking questions." The prairie wind swept across them, bending the grass flat, as if the land itself bowed to their words. He realized then that this wasn't an idle threat. He wasn't dealing with squatters or drifters. These women had power here, power that went beyond strength, beyond numbers, power rooted in something he couldn't yet name. And as the sun dipped lower, their shadows stretched long across the pasture, reaching for him like chains. The folded deed in his hand suddenly felt like little more than scrap paper. He had thought the ink and the seal made it unshakable, proof that the land was his. But the way these women stood before him, their gazes unyielding, their bodies rooted to the earth like stone pillars, made the document feel flimsy. It might have carried weight in town, but out here, it was meaningless. The woman in teal reached into the folds of her dress and pulled out something of her own. A worn parchment, edges frayed, but still holding an official stamp at the bottom. She held it aloft with deliberate care, letting him see the heavy scrawl of ink, the pressed wax seal, the signature that sent a cold shiver through his chest. "This," she said, her voice steady, "is the contract he signed with us. Marcus Vane. Promises in writing. Promises in flesh." His stomach turned. He knew the name. It was on the bill of sale he'd received, the man he'd bought the property from. But that man had never mentioned this, never hinted that the land came with more than soil and walls. The woman in red stepped closer, her shadow swallowing him whole. "He made agreements," she said, her tone low but carrying across the field. "Not only to work the land with us, but to give himself fully. To share labor, yes, but also companionship, partnership." She paused, her eyes narrowing, as if gauging his every reaction. "And to sire children. Ours." The words slammed into him like a hammer. He staggered back a half step, his boots sinking into the dirt. "That's insane," he said quickly, too quickly. "You can't bind me to that. I never agreed to. You didn't have to." The gold-dressed woman's smile was sharp, humorless. "The contract extends to whoever inherits the land. He promised us not just his body, but the body of the next man foolish enough to take his place. That's not how contracts work," he shot back, though his voice trembled. "Not legally, not anywhere." The lavender woman's lips curved, almost gently, though her eyes betrayed no softness. "Tell me," she said, "do you think law matters when you're 3 days' ride from the nearest courthouse? Do you think anyone will come out here to argue on your behalf? No, stranger. Out here, paper only matters if the people holding it decide it does. And we do." His pulse thundered in his ears. He tried to tell himself this was bluff, intimidation to scare him off the land. But there was something in the way they spoke, something too measured, too certain. They weren't improvising this. They weren't guessing. This had been set in motion long before he arrived. The red-dressed leader leaned down slightly, her face close enough that he could see the flecks of steel in her eyes. "You think you came here by choice? No. You were delivered. Marcus may have left, but he left us with his word. And now that word lives through you." His breath caught. He had come here seeking freedom, but what he had walked into was not freedom at all. It was a trap one sealed with promises written long before his arrival. Promises that now wrapped around him like chains of ink and flesh. The wind swept across the open plain, carrying with it the silence of a land too far from law to care about justice. He turned in a slow circle, scanning the fields, the fence posts leaning like weary sentinels, the empty road he had traveled for 3 days without passing a soul. The weight of what the women had said pressed into him now, heavier than the deed still clutched in his fist. Out here, contracts didn't matter. Out here, the only authority was the one that stood in front of him, 4 giants who claimed him as part of a bargain he had never made. He forced a breath into his lungs, steadying himself. "I didn't sign anything," he said, his voice low but firm. "Whatever Marcus promised you, that's between him and you. I came here for land, not for—" His words faltered, unable to shape the thought into sound. The image of what they demanded of him coiled in his mind, heavy and inescapable. The gold-dressed woman stepped off the porch, her boots crunching on gravel as she approached. The sun glinted off her hair, her height casting him into shadow. "And where will you go if you refuse?" she asked. "Back down that long road? 3 days through the wild, alone, with no water stops and no settlements willing to take in a stranger? Do you think the land will spare you? Or the men who roam it?" Her words cut deep, because he knew she was right. The ride-in had been brutal, his horse already worn, his supplies running thin. Even if he turned back now, the chances of making it safely to town again were slim. He had bought this place because its remoteness promised peace. That same remoteness now sealed him off from escape. The woman in teal leaned against a fence post, arms folded. "We're not telling you this to torment you," she said. "We're telling you because there's no easy way out. The world beyond this land won't save you. It doesn't care. Out here, we care, and out here, we decide." His hand twitched toward his rifle again, but he froze. Would a weapon even make a difference? Against one, perhaps. Against 4, each towering, each built with the strength of years of labor, the odds were against him. And even if he managed to drive them off, then what? Stay on land haunted by their presence, sleep each night wondering when they'd return? The lavender woman stepped forward now, her voice softer, but no less firm. "You're thinking of fighting. Don't. You're thinking of leaving. Don't. You're trapped, and you know it. But being trapped doesn't mean being powerless. It means you have a choice: stay and honor what was promised, or run and lose everything." The leader in red closed the space between them, her presence overwhelming, her gaze fixed on his face as though she could read every thought. "This isn't about law. This isn't about fairness. It's about survival. Ours, and now yours." The words sank in, heavy as stones. He realized then that the land he had dreamed of as a sanctuary was nothing of the sort. It was a cage, and the bars were made not of iron, but of distance, silence, and 4 women who had already decided his fate. The leader in red drew a slow breath, her gaze fixed on the horizon as though gathering strength from the land itself. "You don't know what he did to us," she said at last, her voice quieter now, stripped of its earlier sharpness. "Marcus Vane wasn't just a man who sold you dirt and timber. He was a man who came here with promises, and he left us with scars." The gold-dressed woman's jaw tightened, her hands curling into fists at her sides. "He told us we'd build something together, that this land would be a place where none of us had to be alone. He said he'd stand beside us, that he'd give us a family, and we believed him." The teal woman let out a harsh laugh, though it broke halfway into something bitter. "Believed him until he ran. Took the money, left the work, and left us with debts that could drown us. Traitors won't forgive. Debts don't vanish. He tied us to his schemes, then vanished into the horizon." The lavender woman's eyes softened, though her voice carried a weight that pressed on him. "And he didn't just leave debts. He left emptiness. Nights where we worked the fields with no one at our side. Winters where we held each other for warmth because the one who promised to stay had already gone." She met his eyes, her towering frame still but her expression almost pleading. "Do you understand what that does? To trust, to give, and to be abandoned?" He swallowed, the ground beneath his boots suddenly unsteady. He had come here thinking of his own hardships, the years of scraping by, the hunger for a chance to start fresh. He hadn't imagined that others had lived through betrayals just as sharp, wounds that still bled beneath the surface. The woman in red stepped closer, her eyes fixed on him with a strange mixture of fury and sorrow. "We gave Marcus everything, our sweat, our labor, our faith, and when he left, he made sure we'd never stand alone again. He promised us the next man would honor what he failed to, that his successor would be bound not just to this land, but to us." His chest tightened. "And you think that's me?" The gold-dressed woman nodded once, firm and unyielding. "It is you, whether you wanted it or not, whether you knew it or not. His betrayal chained you to us the moment you stepped onto this soil." He shook his head, but the fight in him weakened. Their words weren't just threats anymore. They were confessions, torn from the marrow of their past. And beneath the intimidation, beneath the towering strength of their presence, he saw something raw: loneliness. The lavender woman's voice dropped to a whisper, barely carried by the wind. We're not asking you to be him. We're asking you not to leave us broken like he did." The silence that followed was heavier than any threat they could have uttered. For the first time since arriving, he felt not only the weight of danger but also the weight of need. The sky was beginning to bruise with twilight, streaks of orange fading into deepening blue. His horse pawed nervously at the dirt, as though it too could sense the heaviness of what had been spoken. He held the deed tighter, though it felt less like proof of ownership now and more like a useless scrap. The women had not moved. 4 towering figures stood in a half-circle around him, not pressing closer, not stepping back, simply waiting. The leader in red finally broke the silence. "You're trying to make sense of this," she said, her tone steady. "You think this is about land, about money, about documents." Her head tilted slightly, her gaze sharp as a blade. "It's not. It's about us. About survival. About blood." The gold-dressed woman crossed her arms. "We don't just want a partner to till the soil and mend the fences. We need someone who will give us more. The kind of more Marcus promised, then fled from." The teal woman's eyes locked onto his, unwavering. "Children." She said the words simply, like a stone dropped into still water. "We want children. Our line, our strength, carried forward. Not left to die in empty fields." The lavender woman stepped closer, her presence softer, though her height still dwarfed him. "You see towers before you, strength carved from years of labor, but strength without legacy fades. We've given everything to this land, but without a future, it's dust. You are that future, whether you accept it or not." His breath caught, and for a moment the world seemed to tilt beneath him. "You can't just decide that. You can't demand." The red-dressed leader cut him off with a raised hand. "We're not demanding. We're telling you what was promised, what we were owed. Marcus tied you to us when he sold you this land. He knew it. We know it. Now you do." He looked from one face to the next, each expression carved from equal parts steel and ache. They were not seducing him, not cajoling. They were stating fact, as if the sun rose for them and set for him alone. His mind scrambled for logic, for law, for anything that could pierce the net tightening around him. The gold-dressed woman took a step forward, her shadow falling over him. "We don't expect you to love us. We don't expect you to understand us. But you will not leave us barren. That is the only condition. Stay, and you'll have more than you ever dreamed. Try to run, and you'll find there is nowhere left to go." His pulse thundered. The rifle at his side felt like a hollow comfort. The land he thought would free him now wrapped around his throat like a collar. 4 giants watched him, not with lust alone, but with purpose. What they wanted was not a choice, not a whim, it was destiny carved from betrayal and need. And in that moment, he realized the truth. They didn't just want his body, they wanted his future, bound to theirs forever. Night settled over the land like a blanket of ink, stars pricking the sky with cold light. He sat on the porch steps, the deed folded uselessly in his pocket, while the 4 women moved about the homestead with quiet purpose. They did not chain him, did not bar his way, yet he felt the weight of their presence all the same. Every creak of the floorboards above, every echo of footsteps across the yard reminded him that he was not alone, not free. And yet, he did not mount his horse and ride into the dark. The lavender woman passed him first, her tall frame outlined by lantern glow. She carried a pail of water as easily as if it were empty, her strength casual, unthinking. But when she caught his gaze, there was no malice, only a tired kind of softness. "You should eat," she said, voice low. "Hunger makes a man foolish." Later, the teal woman brought him bread, still warm from the hearth. She placed it beside him without a word, but lingered just long enough for him to notice the faint tremor in her hands. Her eyes betrayed something her voice never had: hope. Inside, he could hear laughter, rough, tired, but real. The gold and red women speaking in hushed tones, trading words that sounded like memory. It struck him then that these 4 had lived not as strangers but as something more, bound by circumstance and choice. They had built this place together, suffered losses together, endured betrayal together. He had arrived expecting empty land, but instead he had found a family. Broken, bruised, unconventional, but a family nonetheless. His chest tightened. The thought should have repelled him, but instead it stirred something buried deep, a hunger he had long ignored. For years, he had chased land, money, freedom, yet none of it had ever quieted the emptiness in him. Sitting here now, beneath the weight of 4 towering shadows, He realized the truth. He hadn't been running from the world. He had been running from loneliness. The red-dressed leader appeared at the door, her gaze fixed on him. "You haven't run," she said simply, as if the choice surprised her. "Most men would have. I thought about it," he admitted. His voice cracked, raw with exhaustion. "But where would I go?" Her lips curved, not in triumph but in something quieter, almost tender. "Perhaps you're beginning to understand. You belong here, more than you realize." The words struck deeper than he wanted to admit. He wanted to deny her, to cling to anger and defiance, but the warmth of the bread still lingered in his hands. The echo of laughter still drifted from within the house, and the lavender woman's gentle warning still pulsed in his ears. Belonging fragile, dangerous, but real was already weaving its threads through him, and as the stars wheeled overhead, he realized that his fear was no longer the only thing keeping him awake. Something else stirred now, something far more unsettling. The pull of wanting to stay. Dawn spilled across the plains, painting the fields in gold. He woke to the smell of wood smoke and the sound of low voices outside. For a moment, he thought he'd dreamed it all, the towering women, the contract, the impossible demands. But when he stepped onto the porch, they were there, waiting as if they had known he would rise at this hour. The red-dressed leader gestured for him to follow. "If you're to understand what we ask, you must see what we've made." Reluctance weighed on his steps, but curiosity pushed him forward. They led him across the land, through rows of crops neatly tended, soil dark and rich. Irrigation ditches carried water with precision, carved by steady hands. The teal woman pointed to the channels with pride. "We dug these ourselves. Months of work, stone by stone. The land was barren when we came, now it feeds us." He nodded despite himself. The system was clever, the kind of engineering that spoke of patience and strength. Further along, the gold-dressed woman guided him toward the pastures. Cattle grazed on grass that looked healthier than anything he'd seen since arriving. Chickens clucked in a sturdy coop, and a handful of pigs rooted in pens built from thick timber. "We built this too," she said, her voice hard, while Marcus took the credit. Traders came, saw his face, but it was our hands that shaped all this. The lavender woman trailed behind him, her presence quieter but constant. Every wall, every fence, every seed. We bled for this ground. We nearly broke for it, but we held each other up. And when he abandoned us, we held it together still. They brought him last to the farmhouse itself. Inside, the air was warm, filled with the scent of bread baking. The rooms were simple but carefully kept. A long table polished by countless meals, shelves lined with jars of preserved fruit, a hearth still glowing from last night's fire. It wasn't luxury, but it was home. A home they had built with determination stronger than iron. The red-dressed leader turned to him, her gaze steady. "Do you see now? This isn't some wild fancy. This isn't whim or lust. This is a life we've forged with our own hands. But it cannot continue without you." His throat tightened. "Without me, you've already done so much." She shook her head, cutting him off. "We can build walls, we can till fields, we can trade with towns, but we cannot make a future alone. We need more than our strength. We need blood that carries forward. We need you." The words hung in the air, heavier than any threat. He glanced around the home, at the evidence of their labor, their resilience. It was more than survival. It was thriving, and for the first time, he felt not just their demand but their plea. The lavender woman stepped closer, her voice softer than the others. "We're not asking you to replace him. We're asking you to stand with us, to build something real, to belong." The silence after that was different, less like chains tightening, and more like a door waiting to be opened. The fire crackled in the hearth, shadows flickering across the farmhouse walls. He sat at the long wooden table, the deed spread flat before him, its neat ink mocking the storm in his chest. The four women stood across from him, silent but unyielding, each gaze locked on him as though they could see the answer forming behind his eyes before he even spoke it. He traced the edge of the parchment with his thumb. All his life, he had chased freedom, working odd jobs, drifting from one opportunity to the next, always saving, always searching for the one chance to own something that couldn't be taken away. This land had been that chance, his dream, his salvation. But now, that salvation had come with a cost he could never have imagined. The gold-dressed woman leaned forward, her hands braced on the table. "You can leave," she said flatly. Ride into the hills, vanish into the dust, but you'll lose everything, your savings, your future, your name. This land will never be yours again. We'll see to that. The teal woman's voice cut in, lower, steady. Or you can stay. Stay, and you'll not only keep what's yours, you'll share in what's ours. Fields, livestock, trade, a home, and more than that, a bond. One that will last longer than ink on paper. His chest tightened, the air thick in his lungs. The lavender woman stepped forward, her height casting a shadow over the table. We're not forcing you, not like Marcus did. But understand this. Once you choose, there is no going back. If you stay, you're bound. If you leave, you'll never return. The leader in red watched him, her expression unreadable. For the first time since he'd met her, she seemed less like a towering sentinel and more like a woman holding her breath. What do you want truly? She asked, her voice softer than the crackle of firewood. Freedom or belonging? Be honest with yourself. Because whichever you choose, you will live with it until the end. His hands trembled. He thought of nights spent alone, campfires burning low, silence pressing so heavy it felt like drowning. He thought of the endless road, of debts and dangers, of men who wouldn't think twice about cutting him down for a horse or a rifle. Then he thought of what he had seen today. Irrigation carved from stubborn soil, livestock thriving, laughter drifting through the halls of a home kept warm by 4 hands working as one. Belonging. The word struck him like an arrow. It terrified him, but it also ignited something he hadn't felt in years. Slowly, he folded the deed and set it aside. His eyes lifted to meet theirs, one by one, until they rested on the leader in red. His voice was hoarse, but steady. I'll stay. The room exhaled, as though the house itself had been waiting. Relief flickered across their faces, mixed with something sharper hope. The red-dressed woman stepped closer, her hand brushing the table as though reaching for his without daring to touch. You've chosen, she said. There's no return now. And though fear still clawed at his chest, another truth rose stronger than the fear. He didn't want to return. The weeks that followed blurred into a rhythm he hadn't known he craved. Mornings began before sunrise, the smell of bread and coffee drifting through the farmhouse as the women moved about with practiced ease. Days were filled with labor, repairing fences, tending cattle, hauling water to the crops, and nights with quiet conversation around the hearth. It was hard work, but not the kind that hollowed a man out. This was work that stitched him into something larger, something living. The red-dressed leader, Helena, as she finally told him her name, proved as steady in partnership as she was in command. She planned with him, listened to his ideas, argued fiercely when she disagreed, but always with a respect he hadn't expected. The gold-dressed woman, Ruth, carried fire in her voice and stubbornness in her hands, yet her laughter, when it came, was rich and disarming. The teal-dressed woman, Miriam, revealed a sharp mind for trade and numbers, her practicality balancing the group. And the lavender woman, Alara, was gentler than the rest, though her strength was no less. Her quiet presence steadied him more than words could. They worked as one, their bond woven from both survival and choice. And slowly, almost against his will, he began to feel it too. The belonging he had once feared now taking root in him. He hadn't just stepped into their arrangement, he had stepped into their family. At first, the nights were awkward, charged with expectation he didn't fully understand. But they gave him time. They didn't demand, didn't corner. They let him see them as more than giants, more than obligations. They were women, each carrying her own wound from betrayal, each holding out hope that he might not tear them open further. And one by one, the walls between them thinned. A hand lingering on his shoulder after a long day. A smile across the dinner table that held no malice. A word spoken softly, almost tender. When the first true touch came, it was not a demand but an offering. And when he accepted it, the bond between them shifted, not into chains, but into something he had chosen as much as they had. Months passed. The farm thrived under their joined effort. Debts were paid, new trade routes opened, livestock fattened. The house, once echoing with absence, now brimmed with the sound of footsteps, of voices, of life. He found himself laughing more than he had in years, and working harder too, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, the 4 women gathered with him on the porch. The fields stretched out before them, heavy with grain ready for harvest. Helena broke the silence. "Do you regret it?" she asked. He looked at each of them in turn, at Ruth's fierce eyes, at Miriam's quiet pride, at Alara's soft smile, at Helena's steady strength. The fear that had once consumed him was gone, replaced by something sturdier. He shook his head. No, not once. Their laughter carried into the night, a sound richer than the prairie wind, fuller than the silence he had once clung to. He had not found solitude here. He had found something far more dangerous and far more precious, a family. His family.